I'd like to start just by saying, before we get into the teaching, that I truly have missed getting together in this building. I miss seeing your faces. I know we've got to talk on the phone, some of us, and a few that I've bumped into, but I miss the church. I miss you. Like an idiot misses the point. Think about that a little bit. But hopefully, in another week, part of us at least can be together if you feel secure enough to brave the elements and get with us here. But today, I want to speak, or I was asked to speak by Scott on the series sermon, Stranger Things. And he gave me the person of Naaman to talk about. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Naaman, but it's kind of a short little passage in 2 Kings 5 that I'm going to spend most of the time in if you want to look that up and be ready. But first, I think we need to share a couple of things from Facebook Wisdom that I saw this week that I think are appropriate. The first one went something like this: is it really a bad habit if I like it? The second one was, if you want breakfast in bed, sleep in the kitchen. Now, that might not seem like it has too much to do with 2 Kings, but search through there and see if we can apply those two things. I think the whole synopsis of this passage boils down to, we must obey the Lord, even if we don't understand. Probably one of the prime examples of that I've seen, and this may show my age, although I think it's a good enough movie that it's replayed enough times people see it, The Karate Kid, Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi. The very first one, when Daniel wanted to learn karate. And the first thing Mr. Miyagi does is have him washing and waxing cars. And he's making circular motions, and he works till 10 o'clock at night, way late. It's dark, and he goes home sore and tired. And then he has him paint the house. Different techniques, different movements. But all through this, Daniel's just getting angrier and angrier. I didn't come to be your slave. I didn't come to be your servant. I came to learn karate. But all of a sudden, it dawns on him what Mr. Miyagi has taught him, how he's conditioned muscles, how he's ingrained motions and taught the muscles to move in certain ways. And I think that's a lot the way God's working with Naaman here. Anyway, I'm going to refer back and forth through this pretty regularly, but keeping with the idea of Stranger Things, I think the first thing that Naaman has is a strange situation. Let's read just that first verse of 2 Kings 5. Now Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man with his master and highly respected, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was also a valiant warrior, but he was a leper. You know, there's a lot of things in that first verse right there about Naaman. Do you realize that in the whole of the recorded Bible, there's only one Gentile that's recorded as a valiant man, a mighty warrior? All the rest that are given that title were leaders of the tribes of Israel, great warriors for them. That's the first thing I want you to remember. He's elevated way up there in stature. The king respects him. But he has a hang-up. He has leprosy. It's a disease. Now, the Arameans didn't see that as nearly as much of a bad deal as Israel did. So from the time that God gave Moses the law, Israel pretty much shunned the lepers. They were cast outside the city. They had to live separately by themselves. And I don't know how many of you know what ancient leprosy looked like. We have modern medicine to work with, but I just want to run through a quick synopsis of what Naaman was looking at in his future. Leprosy starts as little red bumps on the skin that turn into white spots. And those white spots eventually spread over the whole body. After that happens, the hair starts falling out. Then after that, the fingernails and the toenails start coming loose, and they eventually rot to where they fall off. If you live through all that, eventually the joints on your fingers start to rot away, and your fingers fall off, and your toes. The soft palate in your mouth, the cartilage in your nose, and if you live long enough, even your eyeballs rot and fall out. And there really was no cure. So this is what this great mighty warrior had a future to look at. A very strange situation to be. He was powerful, revered, and dying. But the next verse has another strange situation to it, a little twist. Verse 2 says, now the Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. Now, all through history, these two peoples have been fighting. Now, this evidently is a relative time of peace, but they're still sending marauding bands into Israel and capturing people and taking them back. Now, if we look at this from the perspective of the parents of this little girl that got taken away, they probably grieved for her every day. They probably wanted her to be home with them. But these people had grabbed her. They put her in Naaman's house to take care of Naaman's wife. You might call her an unwilling missionary, because the next verse says, and she said to her mistress, I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, then he could cure him of his leprosy. You know, that might be a lesson to all of us, you know, to shine wherever we are, to shine when we have a chance to do so. I'm sure that it wasn't high on her priority list to go out one morning and say, I'm going to get captured and taken off to a far country. I'll find something to do there that makes it look good for God. Probably not. But along with that, we have to realize that here's a girl. This is an unabashed thing for Bible reading and Sunday school and youth groups. Raise up the kids in the way they should go. Teach them about God. No matter where they are, it will come back. Here's a girl that is taken away, but she's not so shy that she says, look, I've got a God, and he's big enough that this prophet in my home country, he could fix this if you just go there. Would that we were all that good of witnesses in what we do. Anyway, go on with the story. And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, thus and thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel. And the king of Aram said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. And he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothes. This probably moves into the next segment of strangeness in this story, and that is the strange expectations that Naaman had. You know, he hears this little girl speak. He says, well, you know, there's something to this maybe. So he goes and tells his king about it. And the king, even though he's been feuding with the king of Israel, says, I'm going to write you a letter and send you to him and see if he won't heal you. Now here I think we have expectations that surely the king of each country is the most powerful man there and able to do anything that anybody else can. But I think that's a false assumption that we'll see here later. But the king sends him. The king sends a letter to the king of Israel, and he says, just heal this man. And he sends quite a lot of money. One deal I read said if you converted that into today's dollars and cents here in the United States of America, that would be something well on top of $1.2 million. That's what the king thought it was worth to have his valiant warrior healed. So he hands him this money and says, take off and go. Go get this fixed. If there's a chance, I want to see it happen. But then we get to, Naaman gets to Israel. In verse 6, it says, and he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, and now as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. And it came about when the king of Israel read the letter, that he tore his clothes and said, am I God to kill and to make alive? That this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? But consider now, and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me. Now, if you go back and piece together things from the previous chapters, this is probably Jehoram is the king at this point in time. And he was not a godly king. He didn't follow God. Maybe not as evil as his father and grandfather, but he still wasn't a godly man. And he's distraught. Here comes the king of Syria saying, heal this guy. Well, in the first place, he can't. Second place, he says, all he's going to do is make this when I fail. It's a reason to come in here and swap me around some more. And we're going to be in trouble here. There's no way this is going to work. And he's so distraught, he just tears his clothes. Now, the rest of that story is Elisha lives just down the road a little ways, and he hears about this somehow. I'm not sure. That day and age, we didn't have internet or CNN news or anything else, but somehow he gets word of what the king has done. Verse 8 says, and it happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king saying, why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there's a prophet in Israel. Part of this expectation is Elisha knows what God can do. And this may not be the strange part of it, but the strange part is we have to believe enough to follow what he says. Now, evidently, Naaman had a little bit of faith because he left the king's palace and headed down the road. And we have no record of what Elisha's house looked like. But in my mind, it was a far more humble abode than what the king lived in. But listen what happens. Verse 9, so Naaman came with his horses and his chariots and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. By today's vernacular, he brought his whole crew, stood there and waited for Elisha to come out and say something to him. He expected Elisha to come out and treat him with the honor and the respect that he was accustomed to. Remember, this is a mighty man, a rich man. He's carrying $1 million plus around. Walks up there and says, I'm here. And I think this is a strange part of Elisha's thing, but it shows the wisdom of he being influenced by God. He says, and Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, that your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean. But Naaman was furious and went away and said, behold, I thought he would surely come out to me, stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. See, Naaman already had it figured out how God was going to make it happen. He goes up there with his whole entourage. I'm here, heal me. What does Elisha do? He doesn't want to be given the credit. We'll talk about that a little more in a minute, but he sends a servant out. He says, tell Naaman to just go down to the river and wash 7 times. That's all you have to do and you'll be cured. Well, Naaman's furious about this whole thing. Verse 11 says, but Naaman was furious and went away and said, behold, I thought he'd surely come out to me and stand and call and wave his hand over the place, cure the leper. And then he says, are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. He walked away from the saving grace that Elisha was offering him. He turned his back on it. But luckily, like so many times in our lives, somebody comes along and says, hey, you're getting off course here. And it happens to be in this story that's one of his servants. He says, then his servants came near and spoke to him and said, my father, had the prophet told you to do some great thing? Would you have not done it? How much more then when he says to you, wash and be clean? You know, one commentary I read something to the effect that, well, if he'd asked you to sacrifice 100 bulls or 1,000 bulls, you'd have done it in a heartbeat, and it was within his means to do that. But he said he gave you a simple little thing. Go ahead and try it. See what happens. And eventually Naaman relents, and he goes to the Jordan with the whole entourage again. Horses, chariots, everybody moves down to the river. The muddy Jordan River, not as clean as the ones in Syria. Interesting little sidebar. Some of the commentaries relate that dipping motion and translate it to be plunged, or a similar word to what we would use for baptizo. And so Naaman, in obedience, plunges into the Jordan 7 times, clear under, washing himself. And then we get to the third part of this, and that's the strange exaltation. Naaman went, and he exalted God by being obedient. He dipped himself in the river 7 times. Not dipped, plunged, dove into that muddy water. But after the 7th dip, he came up completely healed. It says in verse 14, now he went down, dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. He was clean. Remember the prognosis for leprosy? Remember, there's no cure. 7 dips under the water, and he's clean. He was completely healed. And his declaration is one of absolute joy. It says, when he returned to the man of God with all his company and came and stood before him, he said, behold, now I know that there's no God in all the earth but in Israel. So please take a present from your servant now. Now here we may be bordering back and forth between exaltation and expectations, but I think it was customary in Naaman's life and circle, when something good happened, you gave him a reward for it. And that's what he wanted to do to Elijah. But Elisha, being a wise man, says, I don't want any credit for this. I didn't do it. God did it. I won't take anything from you. I don't want anything from you. Take your $1 million+ and go. That would be a pretty hard pill to swallow, I think, for some of us. We have a love of money at times. But then he asked for something that we would call strange. He says, well, if you won't take my gift, he He says, as the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will take nothing. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And then Naaman says, if not, please let your servant at least be given 2 mules' load of earth. For your servant will no more offer burnt offering, nor will he sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. Now again, I think this is a cultural thing. It seems a little strange to us. But in their society, that soil was sacred. That was the soil of the living God, made his presence known. And so if he could take 2 mules load of this dirt and take it home with him and had someplace to kneel down, it would bring him closer to God. And Elisha, he doesn't argue with him about this. I won't read through the whole thing for time, but he says, okay, go ahead and take the dirt. If that's what you need to stay connected to God, go ahead and take it. It may not be what we call sound doctrine, but go ahead and do it. Stay close to God. Stay as close as you can. And then Naaman goes on and he says, well, look, when I get back there, I'm going to have to go worship the gods of Syria. I'm going to have to worship Rimmon with my king. He says, but know this, when I go in there and bow down, I'm not worshiping him. I will not worship him. And Elisha doesn't condone it. He doesn't say, no, don't even get close to that. He just kind of says, work it out for yourself. But know that it's okay, because you are worshiping the one true God. That's really the story of Naaman in a nutshell. It's a story of obedience. Time probably doesn't permit that we go on into the rest of this chapter, but there's a great story on disobedience in the next few verses also, where one of Elisha's servants says, well, if Elisha won't take that offering, he says, I'll chase after him and I'll get part of that for myself and I'll hide it. And quick story short, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, comes back, hides it, goes in. Elisha says, what'd you do that for? I could tell that you were doing it. I knew when you went to see him that you were doing it. He says, no, I didn't. He says, well, because you did, you're going to inherit his leprosy. And Gehazi, even though he got a great physical monetary reward, was cast out to the leper colony for the rest of his life to die an ugly, horrible death from a lack of obedience. So the question becomes today, are we willing to be obedient no matter what? Do we follow God even if it's in strange situations? Even if it doesn't meet our expectations? Even if we don't really know how to exalt and glorify him? Do we do the best that we can to make that happen? Do we do the best that we can to follow hard after him? I think the verse from the New Testament that probably sums up this whole thing, Jesus had a way with few words to say a whole lot of things. And we probably could have stopped the sermon right here if we'd have just started with this verse and ended here. But John 14:15 says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. We may not do it perfect. We may not do it anywhere close to what God foresaw it to be. But if we're trying, I am convinced that God will honor that. Even if they're bad habits and I like them, we may still find God in them. And I'm pretty sure he serves breakfast in bed wherever we are. So today, we come to a time of decision, a time of, where am I with God? Each and every one of us, each and every week, we offer an invitation. And I would hope that each and every one of us, each and every week, makes a decision. It may not be to come forward physically. Obviously, for the last few weeks, we can't do that here. But as Scott's plea is, I would hope that if you make a decision, you would let someone know, that you would talk to him. We believe that baptism is a quintessential part of salvation. And if you haven't ever done that, I would hope that we would get the chance, somebody would get the chance to visit with you about that. Call Scott, call me, find somebody. We're available. And hopefully soon we'll be together to where we can do it face-to-face easier. But for now, if you haven't made that decision, or if you have a decision of some other kind, maybe we need a few mule loads full of dirt to take with us to keep us on track. Whatever that decision is, move towards God, and he will move towards you. We're going to have an invitation song, but before we do, let's pray. Father, we do thank you so much for all that you do. And we plead forgiveness when we fall short of the mark that you have for each and every one of us. But give us a little bit of faith, just a little bit of what Naaman had, to follow hard after you. That we might pick up the strange things in life and make them common. That we might understand who God is, and it wouldn't be strange to us anymore. These things I pray in Christ's name. Amen.